Most professionals think standardization is an efficiency project. They hear templates, playbooks, and practices, and assume the enterprise is removing waste. That is true, but it misses the pricing logic underneath. Standardization is a wage compression mechanism. It converts expensive judgment into cheaper compliance. Once work is forced into templates, the company needs less local interpretation, fewer fixes, and less dependence on the people who used to keep broken processes moving through memory and improvisation. A surprising number of six-figure careers were built on that local adaptation layer. Not formal authority, not major budget ownership. Adaptation. The ability to make a messy workflow function despite conflicting systems, vague approvals, and recurring exceptions. In large companies, those people became valuable because they knew how work moved. They knew which rule mattered, which one could be ignored, who needed to be nudged, and what sequence avoided delay without escalation. For years, that knowledge carried compensation power because it was hard to document and transfer. Managers depended on it because the system itself was incomplete. The process map said one thing, reality said another, and experienced employees filled the gap. That gap is where many professionals built leverage. They were not always the most senior people, but they controlled continuity. Continuity is valuable when the company fears slippage, service misses, or workflow breakdown more than inefficiency. Standardization changes the economics. Once leadership decides that variability is the cost problem, local heroics stop looking valuable and start looking expensive. The question shifts from who knows how to make this work here to how do we make every team need less interpretation. That redistributes value quickly. The premium moves away from the person who knows the exceptions and toward the function that defines the template. The enterprise wants repeatable control, not customized competence. That matters because templates scale better than people. One employee can stabilize one fragile process. A standardized operating model can suppress variance across hundreds of them. When executives look at margin pressure, management complexity, or process architecture, they do not view local ingenuity as an asset. They view it as evidence that the process has too many degrees of freedom. The more decisions can be encoded into software, rules, and shared taxonomies, the less the company pays for hidden process knowledge. This is why standardization feels unfair to competent people. They did not fail. They became useful inside the wrong economic logic. They tied part of their value to the persistence of non-standard conditions. But once leadership decides the future belongs to uniform operating models, the employee who thrives in ambiguity is no longer strategic. In many cases, they become a signal that the organization still relies on workaround culture. Their competence is real. The willingness to pay a premium is what changes. The compensation effect arrives before the role disappears. Raises become harder to justify because the organization now believes the work should require less individualized judgment. Promotions slow because management increasingly rewards those who design, govern, and audit the standard, rather than those who perform around its imperfections. Scope may even widen while pay logic weakens. One person is asked to cover more teams, geographies, or workflow volume because the template has supposedly simplified the work. There is a political shift hidden inside standardization. Local experts used to win arguments by saying the process does not work here, or that an exception is operationally necessary. But central functions gain power when they can point to a model and call deviation a defect. The debate stops being local practicality versus central ignorance. It becomes conformance versus non-conformance. That is harder for six-figure employees whose leverage depends on discretionary interpretation rather than ownership of the standard. So the divide is not between people who resist standardization and people who accept it. It is between those who remain inside the standardized layer and those who move closer to template authority. If your value comes from executing standardized work, your price will eventually be compared against broader labor pools, better tooling, and thinner management structures. If your value comes from deciding what should be standardized, what cannot be standardized, and where exceptions remain dangerous, your leverage is harder to compress. That is where professionals misread the signal. They assume the safe move is to become the most reliable operator inside the new model. Reliability still matters, but it does not guarantee pricing power when the enterprise is explicitly reducing dependence on local discretion. The stronger move is to get closer to process architecture, policy thresholds, systems design, or exception governance. Do not just become good at following the template. Become useful where the template is defined, limited, defended, or revised. The falsifiability condition is simple. If enterprises keep rewarding localized customization with strong premiums, fast promotions, and protected headcount, then this mechanism is overstated. But that is not the broad direction of large company design. Most firms under cost pressure are trying to reduce bespoke workflow dependence, not celebrate it. They may still praise adaptability in language, but the capital is moving toward shared tooling, centralized rules, and process comparability. In enterprise systems, the slogan is flexibility. The budget logic is sameness. The exposure map is clear. The most vulnerable six-figure professionals are not necessarily weak performers. They are often the ones whose usefulness depends on knowing how to bend the process without formally owning the rules. They operate in the workaround layer, the unofficial continuity layer, the local adaptation layer. They can still look respected and indispensable inside a team. But if leadership can replace that dependence with templates, workflow engines, or centralized controls, the compensation ceiling tightens long before the title changes. The safer positions sit elsewhere in the value chain. They are closer to policy design, enterprise systems, risk segmentation, operating model decisions, or high-stakes exceptions that cannot be flattened without meaningful downside. These roles are not protected because they work harder. They are protected because standardization depends on them. Every standardized environment still needs someone to decide the categories, thresholds, controls, and consequences of getting the standard wrong. The more your work shapes the template, the less the template erases your premium. That is the test professionals should take seriously. If your manager could describe your job in one clean sentence, map it into a template, and explain how the work should run without your local interpretation, you are inside the standardized layer. Get nearer process architecture and exception governance. In a standardizing enterprise, the premium no longer belongs to the person who keeps the imperfect machine running. It belongs to the people redesigning the machine and pricing the variance out of it.